Good morning and welcome to Rule 10 Certificated Staff Evaluation Policy Review as part of the NDE Virtual Day. We're happy to be here. I would like to introduce you to Dr. Mickey Scharf and to Dr. Brad Connor, which are part of, as we're well known up here, as the A-Team or the accreditation team. I am the Director of Accreditation, and Mickey and Brad are accreditation specialists for me for the work that we do in the accreditation. So, welcome. And I'm glad that you are joining us this morning. We want to make sure that we still, even though we're not with you in person, that you have an opportunity to communicate with us with the chat box. And so please go ahead and send us your names on the chat box so we kind of know who we are talking to. And that way you will know where the chat box is and if it's working, if you have any issues and so forth, because we will be able to answer your questions as we move through this presentation. You do not need to wait till the end. We'd like to see what your comments are, your questions, and we will have some communication going on with you as we go through this presentation. So as we start everything that we do up here at NDE, everything is focused around our mission statement: to lead and support the preparation of all Nebraskans for learning, earning, and living. And I believe that our work with certificated staff certainly is part of this mission. The support that we do in the preparation of all of our teaching staff, all of our administrators, to making sure that they are properly endorsed for learning, earning, and living, and that they are properly supervised and evaluated so that they can continue to grow in their work as a teacher or as an administrator. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Mickey for her to start talking about what does it mean to evaluate evaluation of your policies.
Good morning. Thank you, Don, so much for the introductions. I'm Mickey Scharf. I'm the newest member of the A-Team here at the NDE, working with Brad and Don and the plethora of experiences that they have. This morning's session, we have some objectives for you. We want to increase your knowledge of certificated staff evaluation policies, what is required of them via Rule 10 and state statute. We will acknowledge and reference state statute in the review and the steps required this morning. We're also going to understand the steps that you go through as a school superintendent or designated person in updating staff evaluation policies. And at the end of the presentation, we will have a link to a Google form in which you can directly reach out to us, and if you're a new superintendent or a person new to your position, we can look in your file of your last review and approval dates and what we have here at the NDE. The purpose of Rule 10, and we talk about this also in our next session with the revision process, but the purpose of Rule 10 is to assure equity of opportunities across the state of Nebraska for students. We want to encourage quality learning, and in today's session with certificated staff evaluation policies, how school administrators work with teachers on ensuring that we have the best teachers and certificated staff in the classroom with students. Rule 10 also supports accountability, the accountability of the adults, the instruction, and the regulations and policies that a school district is responsible for. This next slide, that is a link to the guidance document for when you are submitting a policy for review. And we're working from our computer screen here, so if it seems a little clunky and I'm reaching, that's because I am. That link there takes you directly to the Department of Education's website, and this is our guidance document. And in a couple of slides, we're going to highlight some of the critical steps, some of the action steps that you as a school administrator need to take when submitting to us a policy review and approval. Going back to the presentation, and the next slide, I'm going to turn it over to Dawn. The first part of that guidance document references statutory authority for policies.
I think we're going to turn that over to Brad.
Oh, I think
Oh,
it's
it is
starting.
Brad.
You know, when it comes to any of the really routine, mundane, boring stuff, then they turn it over to the grouchy guy. So statute authority, the 79.318, Section 5, in state law authorizes the state board to approve all certificated employee evaluation policies across the state in public schools. And that includes policies and/or procedures. We find that in some school districts, the policies cover everything. In others, the policy is very short, and then the procedures cover all of the requirements in Rule 10. But essentially, the state board then passes that responsibility on to the commissioner and then on to our department, so that essentially, by law, all certificated employee evaluation policies and procedures have to be approved by the Department of Education before you take it to your local board for final approval in your district. We've seen some confusion across the state in that process, but the law pretty much says the department has to approve it first, and we notify you once we've reviewed it that it meets all the requirements. Then you take it to your local board, for approval to be placed in your policy manual. They don't ever have to change after that point. Once they are approved, there's nothing that says you have to revise those policies unless the state law changes or unless some requirements in Rule 10 would change. That hasn't happened in quite a while. So we do see school districts that have policies that have been in place on evaluating their staff for 10 or 20 years, and that's fine as long as you don't change them. You don't have to go through that process again. Talk about Department of Ed goals and the relevance to this process. I'll turn it back to Don.
Thank you, Brad. Let me find there we are, our goals. Again, we have 3 goals that have been established with Department of Ed that support our mission statement, and we believe everything that we do needs to fit under one of these goals. And so let's just have a little conversation about these and maybe how this process supports the work. First one is ensuring that education system, including NDE, is taking charge of its roles and responsibilities to provide leadership and enhance support system. We certainly do believe that this process will improve leadership and will also enhance the work that is happening at our schools. And so we all believe that this process has that in mind when you are working with your staff on their staff evaluations. You want to make sure that everybody has equitable access to opportunities for success. And that's not just students, because it says that all Nebraskans, so that would include your teaching staff and your administrators, that everybody is being treated fairly and equitable in their process of assessment, and that everybody has opportunities for success based upon observations, based upon suggestions, based upon plans that may be created. We're all in this to improve, and so we're hoping that the process that you're using is equitable across your district, but also is providing opportunities for success. And then we want to also increase the number of Nebraskans who are ready for success in post-secondary education, career, and civic life. And again, that is not just students again, but we also want to make sure that as our staff pursues additional education through the post-secondary education, continues their career in education, but then also have a productive civic life. So I like to look at this one as increasing the number of Nebraskans who are ready for life, be it their post-secondary education, their career, or how they function within a community. So just to reinforce what Brad had said earlier about one of the issues we've been having is that schools have been sending us their policies and procedures and best practices after they have taken it to the school board. We need to make sure that you understand that we need to look at it first because there may be suggestions. We take it through the checklist and there may be suggestions of changes, and so we want you to make those changes prior to having it voted on by the school board. And so for some reason, there seems to be kind of a flip in that, and so we really would like you to understand that you contact us first with the information, the changes that you're going to make, and then we go through that, send it back to you, and then you take it to your Board of Ed, then you submit it to us for a formal letter of compliance that we have reviewed it and accepted it.
I'm taking the next slide. Thank you, Dawn. The second document that we have linked in this presentation is the Rule 10 checklist. So you have the link to the guidance document that really details those steps you take when you want NDE review and approval of your policy. Dawn mentioned the checklist, that when we receive your documents, what we look at to ensure compliance. And I'm going to click on that real quick just so you can see. There's a fair amount of districts that I've been fortunate enough to work with in the last 6 months on updated policies and procedures and best practices. We go through this checklist, we provide feedback, we correlate if anything's missing, and again, we want to complete these steps before you go to your local Board of Education for approval. 007-061A is annual communication in writing. The second part of this presentation is going to include a practice and application of policy statements and determining if anything is missing from those statements, if they're in compliance, and we are going to use some props today because if you've ever attended a session with us, you know how interactive and fun we are.
Some of us.
2 of you.
007A1B duration, frequency, duration specific to probationary and permanent staff, linked to statute 79-828. A district might have more specific frequency and a duration for probationary staff, and then once a staff is tenured after 3 years, some different steps in that frequency and duration, and again we'll have an application question associated with that in just a bit. 79-828 is state statute regarding superintendent evaluation, which requires that the superintendent is evaluated twice during the first year of employment and annually thereafter. 06, did we go too far? Nope.
No.
Next slide.
Okay.
Thanks, Dawn.
Mm-hmm.
06A1C criteria. Rule 10 requires specific criteria. There's 3 listed here. We have seen policies that have more, which is just fine, but these are the required 3 that we look for in your review. Instructional performance, classroom organization and management, professional and personal conduct. 06A1D is the communication process identifying deficiencies, the means for correcting identified deficiencies, and a timeline for improvement. Again, required to be in your policy. And 06A1E, employee response to the evaluation, and a district plan for training your evaluators. Again, if you have a specific model, Marzano, Danielson, that you are using to evaluate your teachers, the policy requires that you provide staff development, professional development in training your administrators and evaluators. 0706B, much like other parts of Rule 10 for instructional staff and certificated teachers and properly endorsed, your administrators that are performing evaluations need to have the proper administrative certificate. I do point out 79801. This is not currently in Rule 10, but as you will see in our next presentation, as we walk you through the process of revision of Rule 10, that this statute may end up in there, that number one, superintendent of schools, your administrators, or any supervisor that is conducting evaluations, that they shall hold that Nebraska certificate to administer. Okay, this is a transition slide to some application and practice. We've opened the links, they're available to you. We've provided a quick overview of the regulations in staff evaluation. We're going to review these policy examples and discuss any missing components, and also incorporate our props. So, Dawn and Brad, does this policy statement meet compliance? Evaluation procedures and materials will be available to staff via the school website.
For the last time, no. No.
Okay, let's turn it over to Dr. Connor. Please explain.
All right, you know, that evaluation procedures and materials be available to staff via the school website. That's not going to be good enough. The first point that Mickey pointed out was that it has to be in writing. Now, could that be on your website? Could it be in some other electronic format? It doesn't mean it has to be handed out to every teacher on a piece of paper every year. But it does have to be annually communicated to them in writing. And so however you do that in your district, the process for every certificated staff that's to be evaluated has to be up there and up in front of them. It seems redundant, but you basically have to provide that every year to make sure you've met that minimum requirement. Going back, you'll go and do the next one, Mickey?
You want to read this one and see if
All right.
Dawn wants to answer?
So let's go for this. I'll let Don hit the button. Spoiler alert, they're all no, by the way. Anyway, it's good. We don't have a yes button. So typical department here. We're just going to show you what doesn't work and help you work through it. Does the statement meet compliance? The district administration is responsible for designing the evaluation instrument. The formal evaluation should include written criteria related to the job description. Does that cut it?
No, it does not. The district administration is responsible. Yes, we'll agree with that, for designing the evaluation instrument, and we're hoping that they're not working in a vacuum, because there are lots of models out there. The administration does design per se, but may choose an NDE format, working with Dr. Schneider's educator effectiveness. Her department, her section would be a recommendation for you. I know that there are models out there, and we're all working to refine those. But probably the biggest thing is that, according to this statement, the policy needs to require the following criteria: classroom instruction, conduct, and instructional performance. And so it's a little weak in exactly what is making up the evaluation instrument that is described here.
Read the next one and pass it to me.
Okay. Should deficiencies be noted in the work performance, the evaluator should provide a list of deficiencies and a time for improvement. What do you think about that, Dr. Scharf?
I think people want to see the button.
No.
What is missing from this is the corrections mechanism, the suggestions for corrections, the process in which the evaluator administrator is working with the staff person on improving on those deficiencies. So your policy needs to include those specific statements found in the checklist. Timeline, listed of the deficiencies, and most importantly, suggestions and strategies to meet the deficiencies. Our next one,
You want to read it?
I'm going to
Send
read
to
it and
Dr.
I'll send it to
Connor?
Dr. Connor. Does this statement meet compliance? The evaluation process includes a self-evaluation, goal-setting, performance, studies, observations, and supervisor staff conferences.
No surprise.
No.
You know, although any of those would be good or welcome components in your evaluation system, they're not really meeting the minimum requirements. So you can add this stuff if you want to put that in the eval, and if you want to make sure that that's being done by all the administrators in your district, you can certainly do so. but we don't really monitor or regulate what your walkthroughs consist of or what your informal evaluations consist of. That's entirely up to your district to do that. It might be part of your procedures, it might be included in your evaluation instrument, but it's not something that is required as a minimum. So you're certainly free to go beyond that if you want to include those types of things in the evaluation process you're using. Where are we going next?
All right, application slide is me.
Okay, Mickey.
Okay, we're gonna transition to another activity, and some of the questions we get from administrators, superintendents, and those in charge of staff evaluation, questions that they have, scenarios that might arise when looking at updating this area.
So why don't you send this to Dr. Connor?
All right, Dr. Connor.
All right. One of the common questions, does there have to be a separate evaluation policy for administrators? Guys?
No.
Well, explain that. Oh, you want me to explain that? Okay,
Yes.
I'll go back to it.
Yeah.
Could you have a separate evaluation policy for administrators? Certainly you could if you want to separate the two. But keep in mind that statute requires that you have an evaluation policy for all certificated staff. So essentially, if a teacher or administrator certificate is required for a person to hold that job, then a policy has to be in place to cover that evaluation. You can have separate ones for each of your criteria of staff, of certificated staff, if you choose to. You can have one that covers everyone if you think that it'll meet those requirements. Regardless, the minimum components on that checklist have to be included in every one of those evaluation systems. So if you have 5 different evaluation procedures, you'll have to meet the minimum requirements in every one of those 5. Back to you, Mickey, I think another common question. I'll let you go with that. Nope, I guess not. I'm supposed to ask you, right?
Yeah.
All right, not following my script well. Okay, should I include walkthroughs and other informal methods of teacher evaluation in the board policy? Mickey?
Great. No.
No.
Okay, now you got it.
No.
So, we alluded to this a little bit earlier, that of course you can go above and beyond, and a lot of districts do have formal evaluation and then informal walkthroughs and things that kind of enhance the evaluation and appraisal process. Is it required in your board policy that you submit to the department? No. I'm going to go on to the next slide. And can the requirements for probationary and permanent staff be the same?
Don?
And
For the last time, no.
I hesitated on hitting the no because it really is probably one of our closest to our yes ones that we can. According to what is best practice, maybe not. Frequency and duration are often different for probationary teachers and permanent staff. Just because of the 3 years to be tenured, most districts have a separate frequency plan for tenured teachers. But could they have the same process? They certainly could. Frequency and duration is by statute specifically for probationary teachers. For their first 3 years, they do have to be observed twice a year. And so it is a frequency and duration for probationary. But a school district could continue that for all of their staff members. So that one kind of hesitated, but it probably is a no in your district. With that, we're going to go back to Brad.
We're going to talk about some recommendations maybe. These are beyond just the minimum requirements in that checklist and in statute and in rule, but some things that we've seen some schools struggle with from time to time that we think would be helpful for you to consider. And if you look at this, I think your own attorneys would tell you that if you don't have a written policy, you better have it in procedure. If you don't have it in procedure, then we hope you have it in a handbook. If you don't have it in handbook, we hope that it is at least in common practice. And if you can't demonstrate it in common practice, you probably better update your resume because you're going to be in trouble. really the only thing worse perhaps than not having a written policy to cover this type of thing, and that would be a violation of law, but maybe just as bad would be as if you have a policy but you're not following it, because either of those could get you into some difficulty. We really feel like that you've got to have things pretty clearly stated in policy. If they're not in the written policy, then make sure they're in a written procedure, administrative procedure outline, or at the minimum in a handbook. Those necessarily don't have to be approved by your board, but the policy should certainly reference those documents so that in essence they hold up as much as they would in the policy itself. And then make sure that that everybody in your district is actually following what you've written down. In addition, we want to make sure that what you're using matches what's been submitted to us and approved. You don't want to get yourself in a position where you're using an evaluation policy, but it's different from the one that was submitted to us 20 years ago, and nobody's gotten around to doing it since. So as Mickey pointed out earlier, we can let you know when your last evaluation policy was submitted and approved, just to check with what you have in your files and what your administrators are using, make sure they're all on target and up to date. Really, anytime you change them, you need to contact us, make sure we get it through that process before you take it to your board for approval. Mickey, back to you.
Great. We're heading into the home stretch of our presentation, and not only what Rule 10 requires, what state statute requires in a certificated staff evaluation policy, but I think most importantly too, we hope that you find us approachable. If you're a new superintendent, or if you've been a superintendent in your district for a while and you know that your policies need to be updated, we're happy to work with you. We're happy to troubleshoot with you and what needs to be in place. In the 6 months I've been here at the department, I've worked with over 25 school districts on approving and ensuring compliance with policies. It's a lot of fun. And we're here to help, and ultimately going back to the goals of Rule 10 and the goals of the NDE, ensuring equity, making sure that administration, evaluators, and what's going on in the classroom is appropriate and beneficial for students. Mention the links. So we want to provide you that opportunity to reach out directly to us with your contact information, and then we get back to you with what we have here on file. Does it match? In some situations, we're seeing a new submission, and the board policy maybe was updated in 2015, but what we have on file is from 2011, so that 2015 approval didn't get submitted to us when a district was updating. So this is a way to find out if what you have in your building is what we have here. Your name, your position, your email address, and any additional questions that you might have that didn't come up on the chat box during this presentation. Going back to the slides, here we are. Dawn, section director, Dr. Connor, and myself as accreditation specialist reach out to any one of us, and we hope that you are kicking off a great new school year and all the hard work that you do. And if you stay tuned, we've got the Rule 10 timeline for revision process and the steps we're taking to kick out a new Rule 10 in 2020. So thank you again, and thanks Brad and Dawn.
Thank you, Mickey.